Good afternoon. This is the middle of August, 1963, and the only tapes that have been recorded this year are the 4 teaching tapes which have been done while actually teaching the ministers and teachers and practitioners who have come to Hawaii for further instruction along that line. And this will be the first of an entirely new series, and I can explain it only in this way, that if you will notice, each one of our books has a central theme that runs through it, which represents a specific principle, spiritual principle. It seems that right from the beginning, every class brought forth a different major principle. Now, as we study these books, the classes, each one of these principles works in our consciousness to lead us to a higher step, or rather, a higher state of consciousness. The human mind, in and of itself, would never rise above itself. For instance, in the earliest days of mankind on earth, you will find that they fought with each other. They probably threw stones at each other. And eventually they had tomahawks and bows and arrows. Now, the human mind has not advanced one iota from those days to the present ones, because men are still fighting each other, and they are using more and more powerful weapons until they believe they have reached the ultimate in power. But you'll notice the trend of the human mind is the same: to keep fighting and to keep discovering more and more powerful weapons. It never enters the human mind that there is another way than fighting, or that there is another way of gaining peace than with greater weapons. And so you see that the human mind in and of itself can never progress until something higher than the human mind is admitted into the mind that can dissolve the mind and its activities. But until something new, something different, something higher enters consciousness, you will discover that the mind will continue to function along the lines of wanting to do battle and always to seek more powerful weapons with which to battle. It is this same way in every activity of human life. We fight disease as if it were a power, and since we began by searching for a remedy that would be stronger than the disease, we still keep on looking for remedies that will be stronger than the previous ones until we have come to the day of X-rays and medicines more and more and more powerful, but always with the same idea of fighting the disease and of overcoming it with greater and greater powers. We accept business also as an enemy, and we fight business always with greater and greater powers, greater and greater corporations, greater and greater inventions, and the human mind refuses to move out of that orbit of overcoming, destroying, using powers, always greater powers, until you just wonder where it all can end if we find greater powers than we have now. Centuries and centuries ago, men came into an awareness of something that was not a power, something that was not an overcomer or a destroyer. And into the history of mankind, there came, at least to the remnant, an awareness of that which is called spiritual power, spiritual consciousness. And this, as we understand it, is not a power that overcomes or destroys. This is not even a power that you use. We find that, well, for our purposes, we will just start with Jesus the Christ, and we will find that he taught and revealed that which is not a power but is a presence, and its function was not to overcome or to destroy, but to reveal. The Master never even thought of God as a power. He never appealed to God to reform sinners or heal the sick. He himself embodied that presence which revealed harmony, cleanliness, purity, health, sinlessness, where the opposites had been operating. Not by doing something, but by being something. Not by using a force or power, but by revealing that spirit. Here we come to that word, spirit. That which cannot be seen, heard, and yet which is within the nature of every individual awaiting recognition. A whole new era was opened to the world through the ministry of the Master, because it was a doing away with temporal power and a revelation of the nature of that which made temporal power unnecessary. Who made me a ruler over you? Resist not evil. Put up thy sword, because those who live by the sword will die by the sword. Those who live by temporal power will die by temporal power. Now, if we put up the sword, if we resist not evil, does that not lay us open to an attack by evil? Not according to the Master. Once you have given up your reliance, your hope, your faith in temporal power, something takes its place. Something is revealed. Something comes to light within you, to the surface, that does not destroy or overcome the enemy, and yet makes it very evident that there is no enemy anymore. The process is not one that can be described, analyzed, revealed in speech. It has to be experienced. And that is why religion, in its true sense, is not a teaching. That is why in every Infinite Way book there is a statement to that effect. Please remember, this is not a teaching, this is an experience. Then why so many books? To try to educate the mind to lay down its temporal weapons, to try to bring us to the conviction that we can safely put away words and thoughts as well as guns and ammunition, and relax in the spirit. What do you mean, relax in the spirit? If I knew, the world would be doing it. I do not know what I mean if I have to say it to you in words. I know what it is by experience, and I know when any student reaches that place where they experience the ability to relax and rely not on words, not on statements, not on truths, not on things, not on thoughts, but on that unknowingness which has been so well described as the cloud of unknowing, resting back in the spirit, that which cannot be described. It truly is an experience rather than a teaching. It is for this reason that the human mind can never accept it. It is only when we have transcended the human mind that we reach that place in consciousness where we can rest in nothingness and be assured that in that nothingness is the allness, the infinity, the eternality, even omnipotence. When the Master says, resist not evil, we really do not know how much further he went with his disciples in explaining to them why they could resist not evil, why they could put up the sword. Since the Gospels were only put into writing 30 years after the crucifixion, so much may have been omitted from the Master's teaching, so much may have been lost in translation, that we really do not know how much further he went with the disciples. But we know how much further we can go, because in our work we can at least reveal in teaching that that which the world fears as power and fights as power is not power. Now, of course, making the statement that these errors of the world, these evils of the world, are not powers, will of themselves not convince anyone. And therefore, it is necessary in teaching a message such as that of the Infinite Way, that those who teach, and especially when they are teaching the non-power of effect, at the same time have sufficient understanding to prove it, to reveal first in small ways, and later in the larger ways, that it is actually true that the powers that the world fears are not powers. Probably a young student comes to the study with some form of illness or human unhappiness, problem of human relationships, false appetite, sometimes even what the world calls sin. And if the counselor, practitioner or teacher, is enabled to assure that one, now let us not fear this false appetite, let us not fear this sin, and let us not enter into any judgments or condemnations about it, or let us not fear this illness, but rather let us relax for a moment in the assurance of God. Everyone in one way or another has come to understand that the word God has relationship to something supreme, something powerful, all-powerful probably, and at least the word God itself for a while enables a person to relax their fears, relax even their doubts, and bear even with pain and sin for a while, until, with the help of that enlightened consciousness of the counselor, the evil is rendered nothingness. Something takes place that we call a healing. Because now, whereas there was this evil before, now it is non-existent. And we call this a healing. More rightly, in a spiritual teaching, this should be understood not as a healing, but as a revelation of the non-power of whatever it was that we had been fearing as a power. Now, every principle with which we work tends to give us a greater confidence in the non-power of the world of effect. Every principle with which we work tends to give us a greater confidence in the real nature of individual being, of every individual, a greater confidence that every individual has within themselves a source of life, and even where necessary, of resurrection. And this is the end toward which we are building. The realization that I, even I myself, whoever I may be, whatever the circumstances of my present condition, I myself embody a center, a point in consciousness, that which is not only the source of my being, the source of that which maintains and sustains me, but even if I have allowed through ignorance my mind or body or fortunes or morals to deteriorate, that this that is within me is even the function of resurrection, renewal, restoration. And of course, no one can come ultimately to the realization of the true nature of their being until they do recognize that we are speaking of a universal something, a something that is to be found in the saint and in the sinner, in the white and in the black, in the oriental or the occidental, in the up or in the down, because until that conviction comes within us, it cannot even function for us. As long as there is a tiny sense remaining within us that we, by virtue of our religion or our teaching or our goodness or our virtue or some other factor, that we have this and not another, it cannot function even for us. It must be recognized as universal. Now, in our recognition of this, we are recognizing that this center that is within us all, which in the Orient could be called the Buddha or the Buddha mind, Buddhi, or in the Occident could be called our Christ self or our spiritual self. The recognition of this as universal being enables us in our sainthood or in our sinner state, in our health or in our diseased state, to relax and resist the temptation to struggle and fight for the peace, the health, the freedom that we so much desire. And it is the experience of those who have remained on the path, those who have been able to resist the temptations to look back. It has been their experience that in that moment of complete relaxedness, in that moment of complete refraining from mental strife, mental struggle to achieve or to attain or to accomplish, that in that moment, which Scripture calls in the moment that ye think not, in that moment the bridegroom cometh. In that moment the spiritual awareness cometh, the illumination cometh. It is then and then only that the human mind has been overcome as a factor of power, and it resumes its rightful place in our experience. Never doubt for a moment that the human mind is a necessary part of our equipment. But our human mind was not given to us to use as a power. It was given to us as an avenue of awareness. Through my mind, I can become aware of all that is. Through the mind, I can read books and attain knowledge. Or I can learn orally and attain knowledge. I can study and through my mind learn everything that is necessary, even a lot of things that are unnecessary, but still delightful. And then I can use the mind for a higher purpose, as an instrument whereby I can draw from within myself. Now, there are many layers of myself. There are many layers of yourself. If you are a musician, you can learn with your mind to turn within yourself and draw forth not only more music, but more knowledge of music than you ever have learned by the study of books. Any subject in this world that you wish to learn more about after you have finished your studies in the external realm, you can turn within and learn more about that subject from within you as an impartation from these deeper layers of yourself than you ever learned in school. And then you keep on going down further or within further to deeper and deeper levels until you reach that which is the origin of all of the levels, the absolute divine consciousness, that consciousness which we call God, the infinite consciousness, the immortal consciousness, the all-knowing consciousness, the omnipotent consciousness, and which you must never forget is the omnipresent consciousness, so that the place whereon thou standest is holy ground, because right where you are now, or any time of the past or future, in that very place you can turn within and keep going within and within and within until you finally reach it, because it is where you are, since I and the Father are one. And it is in that oneness, that relationship of oneness, that I receive the assurance that I can keep going deeper and deeper and deeper within until I touch absolute bottom, which is the absolute top, which is the absolute height and depth and breadth and circumference. And then, coming to me through my mind is the wisdom of the ages. But the wisdom of the ages is a revelation of the Spirit, which is not power, but which is grace. Now, it has been said early in the century that it is in this century that the secret of spiritual power will be revealed, and it has been. The secret of spiritual power is grace, not by might, not by power, but by grace. And by grace we mean no human effort. No human effort. No mental power, no physical power, just our individual receptivity brings to us the activity of grace, which dissolves these appearances that we call temporal powers. The world is fighting temporal power. Whether the temporal power is a germ, or whether the temporal power is a bomb, or whether the temporal power is the powerful mind of a dictator, it is still temporal power. And the secret revealed by the Spirit is this, that in the presence of divine grace, temporal power is not power. We hear too many metaphysicians say, oh, evil isn't power, error isn't power, disease isn't power, sin isn't power. And they really should not make such remarks, because they are stating only a half-truth. And a half-truth can be very dangerous. Temporal power is power in the temporal scene. And that is why no one has ever been able to stop wars. That is why no one has ever been able to stop the evils of this world, because in the absence of grace, temporal power acts on its own level. It is only when temporal power is brought into the presence of grace that temporal power is discovered to be no power. There have been many chaplains with troops in action who have proven beyond all doubt that temporal power is not power when they were there. There is a book listing such miracles. There are thousands of metaphysical healers of various movements and non-movements who have proven in their lifetime that sin and disease was not a power in their presence. Of course it is a power outside. The Old Testament acknowledges that. 1,000 shall fall at thy left, and 10,000 shall fall at thy right. It just will not come nigh thy dwelling place. And that thy means you who abide in the secret place of the Most High, you who have put up the sword and are abiding not in power, but in grace. And Jesus Christ acknowledges the same thing in the New Testament. If you abide in the Word, if you let the Word abide in you, you will bear fruit richly. If you do not abide in the Word and let the Word abide in you, you will be as a branch of a tree that is cut off and withers and dies. Therefore, do not say that temporal power is not power, but remember always that temporal power is not power in the presence of divine grace, and divine grace is the state of consciousness that has put up the sword, that is not trying to overcome, destroy, have victories. There you have it. The entire secret of harmonious existence, as far as we individually are concerned, is in the attaining of a consciousness of grace. It doesn't mean that you are going to save the members of your family, or your friends, or relatives, or countrymen, except in the degree of their acceptance of the consciousness of grace. But you must acknowledge always that this gift of grace is within each individual, awaiting their recognition. Whether or not they recognize and demonstrate it in this lifetime or the next or the one after is their individual affair. It depends on their individual spiritual growth or lack of it. You see, a great part of the world has come to have faith in some kind of a God, as if there were a God who, for some reason or other, sooner or later is going to come to our rescue and save our life, or save our country, or save our cause. And generation after generation passes and it never happens, because there is no such God. The attainment of this God consciousness, individually and collectively, is the God power, or power of grace. It is not something that is separate and apart from you, that looks down on you and in the end will have mercy upon you. It is not a power that you can pray to and ask favors of. It will not respond. Your harmony will never be greater than the degree of this consciousness that you attain. The consciousness attained by Buddha or by Christ Jesus was the measure of divine harmony, divine manhood they expressed. The measure attained by Moses, Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah, John, Paul, that is the measure of divine manhood that they attained and showed forth. Paul makes it very clear when he says, we have not fully attained. He doesn't say a word about sitting around and praying to God as a power to overcome your diseases or your sins. He speaks of the measure of our attainment of manhood that was in Christ Jesus, or which is spiritual sonship. Therefore, the more we work with some of these revealed principles, and the more we meditate to go deeper and deeper and deeper into our consciousness, the sooner we will arrive at a greater degree of grace consciousness, the state of consciousness that does not take up the sword because it does not recognize a power other than the Spirit of God that indwells us. To begin with, this is an individual mission. Each person must in and of themselves raise themselves to higher levels of spiritual consciousness until they have attained a state of divine grace in which the errors of the world automatically dissolve in your very presence. Eventually, you will discover that as each one of us attains some measure of this consciousness, it is automatically lifting so many others that 10 righteous men, 10 men in a city attaining this can lift up the entire city to their level of consciousness, or to some higher level than the human level. So that we are not waiting for 4 billion people on earth all to attain this consciousness. It will be sufficient if a few here and a few there in each part of the world are raised up into a state of grace, and thereby raise up those who come within reach of their consciousness. As humans, we never will escape from the state of consciousness that is seeking greater and greater powers to destroy greater and greater enemies. And not only political enemies or national enemies, but the enemies of health, or the enemies of prosperity, or the enemies of individual freedom. Always the human mind will be seeking powers. You will know when you are beginning to know powers. Think again, think. In the presence of this divine grace which is established within me, and which has been established within me since the beginning, since before Abraham was. In the presence of this divine grace, there are no powers. And then relax and seek no powers. No powers in words, no powers in thoughts, no powers in things, and learn with the Hebrew prophet not to fear the enemy, any enemy at any level of consciousness, because they have only the arm of flesh, and we have this divine grace, which is all it is. We, in our work, are approaching that stage or level of consciousness, individually and collectively as students, where more and more we are relaxing and resting in this inner peace. And we know why. Because it never must be blind faith. Blind faith will lead you into sad waters. You must know why you can relax in the assurance of this inner grace. And the assurance comes in words from the Master, in demonstration from the Master, and now in the degree that our teachers and practitioners can prove to you these words: I, in the midst of you, am come that you might have life, and that you might have it more abundantly. I, in the midst of you, am this grace. I have been with you since before Abraham was, and I will be with you unto the end of the world. And you have only to relax in me. That I within yourself, which is the Christ self, the spiritual self, relax in that, and you will be relaxing in grace. I have meat the world knows not of. And what is that meat? It is the state of grace which I am, which I embody. I can give you water, living water. And with it you will have life eternal. But you see, you rest back in that I within yourself. That I, that gentle I within yourself, this is the presence, and this is the power, and this is the grace that God planted in us in the beginning. And as we rest in this I that I am, as we relax in this grace, never thinking of it as a power, and never seeking to use it, abiding in it. Abide in the Word. Live and move and have your being in the Word. Forget power. Forget external powers. Forget the power of sin and of false appetite and disease. Forget the power of man whose breath is in his nostrils. Forget the power of the mind and forget the power of the body, and abide in the Word. And as you lose all sense of power and attain the awareness of presence, presence instead of power, the presence of the I that I am, the presence of the meat and the wine and the water, the presence of divine grace, you will find that your mind will relinquish its fears of powers. And you know, all there is to heaven is a life devoid of fears. There is no other heaven. And there is no higher heaven than the consciousness of an individual who has risen above fear. And there is no way to rise above fear if you believe that there is a power. Even if you believe there is a power that God could overcome, you still will have fears that God may not overcome it in time. Therefore, understand the nature of temporal power. It is non-power in the presence of the realized Christ. It is non-power in the presence of the realized presence of the Spirit of God that is within. Temporal power is non-power in the presence of grace. And so this first tape of 1963 goes forth with the message, first of all, assuring us that we have in some measure attained this consciousness of grace, and then reminding the students of the step that must be accomplished, the attainment of higher consciousness, deeper consciousness of the nature of temporal power and of the nature of grace. Thank you.